Welcome to the podcast recording of Middle East AI News, live for Thursday, March 7th, 2024, brought to you by Carrington Malin, marketing for an AI-first world. You're listening to my discussion with Andrew Forson, Head of Growth for the Hashgraph Foundation, where we talk about the Hashgraph, the Hedera distributed ledger ecosystem, and the new DeepTech Venture Studio that the association is creating together with the Saudi government.
Let's dive into today's topic. In today's Thursday Deep Dive, we're going to be talking about Saudi Arabia's latest deep tech initiative, a deep tech venture studio being formed in Riyadh to create and fund new Web3 blockchain, AI, robotics, and quantum ventures. We're going to touch on the Hashgraph Group and the Hashgraph Association and the Hedera distributed ledger ecosystem that backs it, the convergence of AI and blockchain, and the new Saudi Deep Tech Venture Studio that's being established, and how startups will benefit from this studio and how they can apply to take part in that process. I'm going to be joined by Andrew Forson, Head of Growth for the Hashgraph Group. So warm welcome to Middle East AI News Live, Andrew.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Carrington.
Thanks very much for making the time to join us and talk about the Hashgraph Association and the new Deep Tech Venture Studio. Great to have you here.
Wonderful. Great to be here.
Now, deep tech in the Middle East, North Africa region has long been underserved, lacking the knowledge, the investment, the ecosystems, and the incentives for new deep tech ventures to succeed. However, truly great strides have been made during the past couple of years with new initiatives and investment in the future of AI, robotics, semiconductors. And so I'd say your timing is just about right. However, before we jump into the conversation about the Hashgraph Association and the new studio, I gave you a very poor introduction, I feel. So could you just give us a minute on who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have the role of Head of Growth here at the Hashgraph Association and the associated sister companies, the Hashgraph Group and Hashgraph Ventures. My background is actually in financial and risk engineering. I do have a background in software development and having run a number of software companies, but mainly my experience is in dealing in financial services, developing software in the financial services. In the most recent years, I have been a very active participant in the Web3, blockchain distributed ledger community. And as well, I would say in the last probably 3 years, there's been a significant integration with the AI space and Internet of Things space. And I view all of these things as a single convergence in that the technology facilitates solving problems in novel ways all across the world, regardless of infrastructure. I think the one common denominator in all of these instances is pretty much the internet. So the internet has facilitated this explosive growth.
So perhaps you could start off by talking about the Hashgraph Association itself and then move on to how plans for this Deep Tech Venture Studio came about. Could you tell us about the Hashgraph Association and explain what its mission is and what it does and the ecosystem?
Absolutely. The Hashgraph Association is at the forefront of the digital enablement and empowerment of organizations through the broad adoption of Hedera-powered enterprise-grade solutions and decentralized applications. Hedera itself is a distributed ledger technology similar to a blockchain, but is based on a different algorithm called the Hashgraph, hence our name, Hashgraph. Now, what the Hashgraph Association does is we fund training, we fund innovation, and we fund venture building programs globally. One of the characteristic properties of the Hashgraph Association, though, is all the projects that we're associated with tend to leverage or use or attempt to use the Hedera distributed ledger. That's a critical component of what we do. As a nonprofit organization, we're headquartered in Switzerland. I'm actually in the Hashgraph Association offices now in a lovely, charming city called Pfäffikon, which is approximately 30 minutes outside of Zurich. And the Hashgraph Association, we support and fund innovation, research, and development that enables economic inclusion and a digital future for all with a positive environmental, social, and governance impact. So the work that we do, we always keep an eye on ESG and impact metrics as well. And that's very much in keeping with the Hedera distributed ledger, which is by and large known to be one of the most environmentally friendly distributed ledgers in the marketplace today.
It's clear from that introduction, there's actually quite a lot to the Hashgraph Association. The Hashgraph Association is non-profit, am I right?
That is correct. So the Hashgraph Association itself is nonprofit, but we have a network of sister companies, and you can pretty much identify them because the first word in the names of those companies tends to be Hashgraph. But we have a network of sister companies that engage in specific and targeted for-profit R&D or technology development work. So for instance, we have the Hashgraph Group, which works in the space of enterprise technology implementation, again, leveraging the Hedera distributed ledger. And we also have Hashgraph Ventures, which works in the space of venture capital and co-investments, focusing primarily on the seed investment in Hedera Hashgraph leveraging technology, companies that are leveraging the Hedera Hashgraph technology.
In this instance, in the case of the DeepTech Venture Studio, will a number of those organizations be involved? And is that all under the umbrella of the Hashgraph Association?
That's a great question. And you are actually correct. The experience that the Hashgraph Association and its sister companies have had here in Switzerland is able to be effectively ported to other markets to help them accelerate their venture building activities in not just the Web3 Hedera distributed ledger space, but in the entire realm of technology that you accurately described as deep tech. So the structures, the processes of what we do and how we do it is actually very, very critical to the success of the implementation. And our DeepTech Venture Studio effectively captures this information, these structures and processes, and ports them to Saudi Arabia to help Saudi Arabia accelerate their investments and growth of their deep tech industries, which we'll go into in further detail later on.
And so, for example, in Switzerland, the work that goes on to support and create new ventures is done by the Hashgraph Association?
So the Hashgraph Association provides broader support and enablement around Hedera. The support that goes on to support new ventures is conducted primarily by the Hashgraph Group and Hashgraph Ventures. So when we're in a venture building mode, we effectively are looking privately at each company, and we want to make sure that their intellectual property remains private within the Hashgraph Group and that particular company. So effectively, we have an entity that focuses on business implementation, business optimization, in addition to the technical engineering for furtherment and support, and further implementation of Hedera for those enterprise and venture building projects.
Sounds like an awesome array of resources there. And all of this will be brought in some way to the startups that participate in the studio in Riyadh.
Absolutely. I think, on a personal note, I have to say that it is absolutely exciting to work in this space because we are exposed to so much. We get to interact with so many companies, and we really get to focus on solving problems, not just the problems of companies, but also solving the problems associated with end users that are trying to capitalize on this technology. What is great, though, is when we port effectively these business processes and the technology that we have to the Saudi DeepTech Venture Studio, we're able to jump right into the problem solving and technology development phases, which is really, really critical. We don't have to go through that entire discovery process of what are the processes that will result in maximal success for the enterprises that sign on to the project. So what we're going to see is that in Saudi, the acceleration, the development of enterprises, it will actually be even faster and better than the first iteration of what we've been doing here in Switzerland via the Hashgraph Association, Hashgraph Group, and Hashgraph Ventures.
Fantastic. As I said, it's great to see such a wide array of resources and all of that knowledge and expertise and technology, but it's a lot to unpack. So if you forgive me, I'll just labor on a little bit about the different pieces of this. Could you tell us about the Hedera Hashgraph and the ledger ecosystem?
Hedera Hashgraph is a distributed ledger. You'll notice I'm not using the term blockchain, but pretty much everybody who's here on listening to this interview today will be familiar with the blockchains Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then there are others further down the line like Polkadot, Solana. Hedera is one of those. The difference is every blockchain has a different implementation of how they go through ensuring the unchangeability, or in our tech industry, the immutability of data that is allocated to the public chain. In Hedera's case, Hedera is a decentralized, open source, proof of work public ledger that utilizes the leaderless, asynchronized Byzantine fault tolerance Hashgraph consensus algorithm. And it's governed by a collusion resistant decentralized council that we refer to as our governing council of leading enterprises, universities, and Web3 projects from around the world. So it's effectively like a blockchain, but it's actually using its proprietary platform, which is the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. And all blockchains, the Hashgraph consensus algorithm, all of these are examples of public, permissionless, distributed ledgers.
Can you give us an example of what kind of organization would use this and how they use it?
Yeah, many organizations use this. And for one, in the enterprise space, I think a great example of how a distributed ledger or Hedera can be used is in traceability. If we're looking at the traceability of pharmaceutical product, or quite famously, the traceability of food product, you need to make sure that at every point that the natural resource, which is the food, has been touched, it is logged onto a blockchain so that the entire value chain of food production is recorded and people know exactly where their food is coming from. That's the simplest example. So if you were to look at, say, I'm in Switzerland. So Switzerland is very much known for the quality of its chocolate, but Switzerland doesn't grow cocoa. Cocoa is grown mainly in Brazil, in Latin America, and in West Africa. You have countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon. So oftentimes there is a need to know, well, where did all the ingredients of a particular product come from? Now, the cocoa farmer is not necessarily an employee of the Swiss chocolate manufacturer. The cocoa farmer is selling to a local agent who in turn sells to a manufacturing body in country, perhaps in West Africa, that turns the cocoa into a cocoa mac, a liquor, a product. And then that product is exported to Europe, where it is then processed further, ingredients are added to it, and it's turned into the chocolate that we all know and love. At every step along the way, there are different manufacturers and different companies. And at every step along the way, they may have an interest in recording this information so that whenever I buy a chocolate bar, I may be able to tell exactly where the cocoa came from and how many touch points there were. This is a prime example of the utilization of a distributed ledger, because we would be needing effectively a consortium of companies to contribute data into an open network that everybody can rely on in a trustless way. So once they input their data, it doesn't change. It's there forever. People can see it. And that's one example.
The food industry is one of my favorite examples as well, because there's so many different links in the chain. Looking back at your venture building activities, what advantage does the fact that you're plugged into this ledger ecosystem have for the startups that participate in your programs?
Carrington, that's a really great question. I think that people need to realize that 9 out of 10 startups globally will fail. And so, taking from my finance background, what we're most interested in as investors is the mitigation of risk. How do we reduce the risk of investing in a project that is going to fail? And this is where expertise and industry association, and in our case, our very, very close and integral association with the Hedera distributed ledger comes into play. Many of us are familiar with blockchain, but not many of us have actually used a blockchain application or built a blockchain or distributed ledger or Hashgraph related application. But we all know, frankly, through the wide adoption of cryptocurrencies, the wide adoption of decentralized investments, we all know that it is here to stay. And much like the early years of the internet was here to stay, but industry didn't fully know how to use it. In our venture building activities, what we do is we help the enterprises that we're looking to support adopt Hedera quickly in a safe and efficient way so they can get to market faster, solve business problems, and make money. And we're able to leverage the fact that we do this often and we're specialists in Hedera to accelerate this process and reduce risk.
Great. And you've mentioned that your focus and also the focus of the DeepTech Venture Studio in Riyadh will not be focused on blockchain entirely or on Web3. But nevertheless, the convergence of AI and blockchain is quite an interesting topic. And so it might be useful and interesting to touch on that and just get your view on how AI is impacting the use of blockchain.
Carrington, this is one of my favorite topics because I think we have all been surprised by the adoption and, frankly, the ease of use associated with something like a ChatGPT, which is a large language model that has been commercialized so that the average person can take advantage of it. How I would describe the integration of AI and distributed ledger technology and where AI and Hedera could plug together is think of this. Think of a scenario where you have no idea what the AI model is being trained on. So I'm going to take a step further back so that people can get a sense of what it is I'm talking about. We use AI today, but AI is actually an extension of neural network technology that was around in the 2000s, which later became data science, which comprised within it machine learning, which is now AI. So effectively, it's very, very advanced statistical models that using their own processes relearn data to adjust to a better outcome. Now, what is critical here is the actual material that you train your statistical model on. But what happens if we are trying to train our AI model to arrive at correct answers, but the data that we train our AI model on has incorrect values in it? You may look at that and say, that's fine. The AI model is supposed to be able to find things around the edges and eliminate incorrect data. But you have to think that there are some sources, particularly whenever you're in the corporate space or you're an enterprise or a government, that you want to ensure that if an AI model is going to be learning on your data, you want that AI model to be able to guarantee that at least the data that it's working on is coming from a reputable source and is the updated version of the data. This is where blockchain or distributed ledgers, and in particular Hedera technology, becomes indispensable because you're able to assign hashes or date stamps and validate the provenance of the data that is used to train an AI system. So in this regards, the Web3 technology that Hedera provides is almost foundational to all of these deep tech technologies, in particular AI, because increasingly we're going to find that AI models are being trained off of AI generated data. And this will raise the likelihood of arriving at something called hallucinations, where when the data seems to be so similar because AI is generating it, it starts to emit wonky results. In this instance, there's going to be a shift in the approach to AI data training, where they're going to be looking to ensure that the data that the AI models are trained on are actually valid, they're current, they're new, and they are correct. Currently, that is not in wide adoption. And this is something that the interaction of AI and distributed ledger technologies can solve.
Great point. Thanks very much for explaining that. There's a huge potential, and I've not heard of any, frankly, models that have been using distributed ledger technology for the training data and to develop their AI models. But it certainly makes bundles of sense.
This is something that we work on, I'll say, as R&D projects in our spare time. So what I would say is stay tuned. This is definitely a growing area. And I think it's inevitable. The deeper we go into AI modeling, AI development cycles, the more people and enterprises are going to say, look, if you're going to train your data on what you see on the web, we want you to be able to validate that that data is actually coming from us. And this extends not only to data modeling, it also extends to validation of what is a real social media account versus a fake account. This is something that distributed ledger technology, with it being public and immutable, unchangeable, this is something that is going to happen more and more as deep fakes and other fraudulent technologies or other technologies that enable the development of fraudulent outputs become more prevalent. People are going to want to know that is what I'm reading coming from a verifiable source.
Absolutely. In fact, we could have a whole hour conversation on that very topic. But I think for today, we'll move on to the new Saudi DeepTech Venture Studio and perhaps explain how this came about.
Okay, I have to give full credit to the parties that made this happen. And I think without a doubt, this coming to fruition is the result of the hard work, many, many months of hard work of our co-CEOs, Kamal Youssefai and Stefan Dice. They had the vision of being able to create an enablement environment within different countries so that it closes the technology gap that has really impacted much of the world. And these gentlemen are always working. Kamal in particular is always on the road. Anybody in this call who knows Kamal knows that he seems to have jump-started quantum technology by literally being able to be in two places at once. And Stefan puts these proposals together with such a degree of detail that sometimes I think he himself has some sort of advanced AI processing chip, because the man works from, it seems like 4 a.m. to midnight daily. That said, there are also in-country supporters, obviously, of this. In particular, the Swiss government and the Canton Schweiz has been very, very supportive of this. So this is almost a government-to-government initiative. Our organization, being Swiss-based, announced some time ago that during a Swiss economic mission to Saudi Arabia, and this mission was in the presence of the Swiss Federal Counselor, Guy Parmelin, and the Saudi Minister of Investment, His Eminence Khalid Al-Falih. And that's where the signing of the strategic partnership with the Ministry of Investment of Saudi to launch the DeepTech Venture Studio in Riyadh, worth $250 million over 5 years, took place. But the genesis of the thinking, without a doubt, it's Stefan Dice and Kamal Youssefai, and they did the work. They did the groundwork. They did the calls, because this sort of thing is not common, and it really has the capacity to make a massive impact, both in terms of foreign direct investment, technological development, and employment creation.
Thanks for that. How will this roll out over the coming months?
That's a great question. So in terms of the nuts and bolts of this, I think people and enterprises and projects, they can already take advantage and start to register their interest in participating in this by visiting the website hashgraph-saudi.com, hashgraph-saudi.com. And at that website, they click on register. And what happens is during the registration process, it effectively starts the process of figuring out what your project is, what your interest is. We have a discussion, basically an interview process, discuss how we can help, what the processes are, and then we're pretty much moving forward. We already have within our organization here, project management office that has structured the processes needed for interviewing and doing due diligence of the projects. And many of these enterprises, large and small, have already been in touch with us, ranging from quantum, Web3, AI, tokenization, about not only continuing operations in Saudi for the Saudi-based entities, but there are a number of international organizations that are looking to build a Saudi presence, incorporate within Saudi, employ within Saudi. And we're really, really happy with that. And that's in, as you say, just one short month. So the process is just to contact us and we start the process of onboarding projects to the DeepTech Venture Studio.
Great. When do you think, for example, have you got penciled in when your first cohort will be for this program?
Yeah, effectively, we don't necessarily operate in a cohort manner. We, to borrow a term from academics, we use rolling admissions. And the reason why is we never want somebody to be on hold when they have a good idea. And this is particularly important when you're dealing with larger enterprises that have an interest, perhaps, in building a semiconductor or a chip plant in Saudi Arabia. So our objective is to process all the projects on demand, and we are scaling up. We already have the infrastructure to support it. So where there's overflow, we have wonderful people like Lara that you've been in touch with in organizing this particular session. And we have our COO, Emmanuel, who has been incredible in terms of setting up the technological and workflow infrastructures. We have our CTO, Mikhail, who already has his finger on the pulse of all the technology that needs to be looked after. Our marketing support with Dustin. So we are well in place under the leadership of Kamal and Stefan to grow this starting now, starting a month ago.
Great. The overall goal that was announced was creating 500 new ventures within the next 5 years. Do you have a vision of what's going to happen this year? Do you have a target of the number of startups that would be onboarded or the parts of the program that will be implemented? What would this year look like?
That's a great question. So generally speaking, we try to have balance, and our metrics is to onboard approximately 100 projects a year. And that's basically we're averaging out across the 5-year term of the objective. We have good experience in understanding the processes and workflows needed to scale up and onboard that volume of businesses. But the one thing that we will never sacrifice is quality. Our head of ventures in India is very, very specific about ensuring that we have quality applications go through. And obviously, that's something that we want to support. But it does mean that we are actively speaking with different projects, actively promoting Saudi as a business destination. And we're also ensuring that businesses that aren't even associated with Web3 are fully aware of the DeepTech Venture Studio and our capacity to either raise capital in partnership for them, assuming their project is going to be based in Saudi, or make the necessary connections to make their project a success.
Yeah, and you raise a point that I wanted to ask next, actually. If I'm a startup and I'm interested in this new DeepTech Venture Studio, do I need to be based in Saudi to join?
There has to be Saudi touch points. So the short answer is you must have Saudi touch points. You must have a desire to operate within Saudi, access the Saudi market, create employment within Saudi. And I think The reason why I articulate it in that way is oftentimes, and this is one of our key objectives, if there is a robotics entity in Switzerland looking to expand their footprint with partnerships in Saudi, even though they are not in Saudi now, the whole idea of this venture studio is to facilitate that sort of international investment making. Previously, this sort of foreign direct investment initiative was conducted almost exclusively by governments and development finance institutions. In a manner of speaking, we're accelerating that process and we're enabling small and medium enterprises to basically benefit from the tools, connections, and diplomacy that normally were only available to the largest global Fortune 500 companies.
And that reminds me of another point I wanted to clarify as well, which you just referred to, the scale of the companies that would be onboarded to this program. You said startups and SMEs versus large organizations. Do you have a minimum and a maximum in terms of scale and maturity and revenue turnover even?
Yeah, I think you can look at this entire process as a phased process. So, the initial phase, as I described before, phase A of the Venture Studio, will focus on ramping up local operations within these first 12 months and onboarding the first batch, as I said, of around 100 projects. The second phase, phase B, will focus on accelerating the Venture Studio over 24 months, 2 years, and ensuring steady state operations while onboarding and investing in a new batch of 200 projects. So you can see we're still looking at 100 projects a year, but as the phases change, the outcomes effectively will become more efficient. And that final phase, phase C of the 5-year program, will focus on scaling up the Venture Studio operations into new strategic markets globally and onboarding the final batch of 200 projects. Startups qualifying for the program will receive up to $250,000 in venture capital investment, with larger enterprises receiving up to $500,000, and these figures are in US. But I would say that from startups, when I use the term startups, I'll say qualified startups, as in, well, ideas are always welcome and fantastic. The ventures team generally wants to know that the funds that are going to be invested are actually going to go towards the deployment of a real project in one of these deep tech fields. So I think that's critical to highlight. And the deep tech fields are generally AI, Web3, blockchain and DLT, robotics, Internet of Things devices. So devices that operate without necessarily attachment to a phone or a computer and are still able to transmit data via the internet, virtual reality, and a big one that we're seeing is quantum and post-quantum computing.
Great. Let's look at this from a startup's point of view in Saudi Arabia or the region. You've mentioned that there's an application process already open. What can a startup expect from that process in terms of lead times, finding out about the application, in terms of first steps in working with the venture studio, and in terms of support that they could expect to get?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Let me walk you through a standard process. So a standard process is either through referral or a direct email to me or through the website or direct email or contact via Kamal or Stefan or any one of our ecosystem partners. It would be an expression of interest. And then that expression of interest would likely be followed up with a brief interview to find out exactly what that startup is looking to achieve and what the technological requirements would be. If there's a fit, then we will refer them for formal project registration, for lack of a better term. And that would mean that we're creating a project card in our project management system. So this is managed by our COO, Emmanuel, and what we term our project management office. Once it enters into that cycle, a bunch of technologists and engineers will look at the project and schedule an interview. This process can take anywhere, let's say, from 2 weeks to a month. Once the interview is scheduled, If it is deemed that there is indeed a fit and it looks like we would like to progress and evaluate the financials, at that point, we want to include our legal team, which is headed by Vitali and also includes our most capable Alicia, to ensure that we have a good NDA or non-disclosure agreement so that any sensitive information that the project would give us, they know it's protected. And we, in turn, are able to have open and frank discussions with them about their needs, their technology, because we do have to have an honest assessment of what they do and determine what the likelihood of both financial success is and technological success is. That entire process right now, you're looking at perhaps an 8-week window. After that time, if of course, throughout all of this, there are a range of internal committees to ensure that the process is democratic, that it is well vetted in terms of the technology and the investment process. After that time, our ventures team and the investment analysts will go through to determine what is a likely valuation for this company and project and what funding should be made available to them based on that valuation. And this process can vary. A lot of it varies in terms of how quickly the project gets us information. It varies in terms of workload. But you can say that a decision at that point would be made between anywhere from 2 to 4 months. And so you're looking at an entire turnaround time of anywhere from 3 to 6 months in terms of making the investment, getting up and running, getting the engineering team to be able to support the project. Making sure that we have the right experts who are able to provide the right mentoring to the management of the project from managerial perspective and technology perspective.
Great. That's really, really useful. And I think the process of qualification and onboarding is clear, and appreciate the checks and balances in there and the scrutiny that you have, which is important. So again, from a startup point of view, do I get in terms of support, mentoring, assistance in building my technology and my startup? And is that a formula that you have that you adapt, or is it really, bespoke as per the startup's needs?
That is a great question. And this is something that I will tell you, I've been part of a few startups. And the way Kamal and Stefan and the Hashgraph Association, Hashgraph Group, Hashgraph Ventures have structured things is something that I wish I had. Because what they do is not just send a check and you're on your own. Call us whenever you've hit 10x so we can basically exit our position, which is often the position of many VCs. It is truly a partnership and mentorship throughout. Everything from providing technological expertise, everything from ensuring that if you are looking to deploy technology and we already have somewhere in our portfolio a company that has created something that can accelerate your pathway to market, they will make that connection and assist with the integration. So it means you end up as a startup only focusing on those specific pain points associated with your market and associated with the business problems you're trying to solve. And on the subject of business problems, many startups get trounced or tripped up whenever they're dealing with legal issues, marketing issues, sales issues, operations issues. And we have within our venture building studio process, we have access to professionals that can provide rapid responses and quality market proven responses to a lot of these issues. So the startups get to focus on their unique value proposition, and anything that they're doing that we have already done or already seen, we're able to provide them with best practice. Thus, once again, to go back to the original precept I started with this conversation, thus minimizing the risk of the startup failing.
So in short, it's flexible and targeted according to the needs of that startup.
It is very flexible and targeted according to the needs of the startup, but we do have proven processes for how we help the startups along the way from finance, management, and technology.
Sure, sure. So this is flexible, this is targeted. And so as a startup coming into this program, you're actually going to delve into my needs and address those individually rather than put me in a program where let's say 20% of what you give me is not really what I'm interested in or what's going to help me.
No, everything is bespoke. That is quite unique about our venture building studio. We have the processes to be able to provide bespoke support to each startup because every startup is different. They may go through similar phases, but their needs will be different, basically based on their founding team.
So as a startup, what outcomes can I feel that I will get by entering this venture studio beyond the capital?
I think beyond the capital, you're going to end up with a stable business, a viable business plan, and technology that actually works to solve the problem that you set out to solve in the first place. And I think that's even more important than the capital because that's how the capital is accelerated. You have to have the capital end up on the other side of the investment with an output that is sustainable. And that's our primary objective, to implement the solution, to help the startup have a stable business and technology that works so they can solve the business problem they set out to solve.
Great. Thanks for that, Andrew. We're going to close off now. So, Andrew Forson, thank you so much for joining and looking forward to keeping up with your news as you start to bring on startups into your DeepTech Venture Studio.
Carrington, thank you so much. This has been super pleasant. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My email is andrew.forson@hashgraph-group.com. And don't forget about our Saudi DeepTech Venture Studio website, which is hashgraph-saudi.com. Please don't be shy. Submit your projects, and we look forward to helping you and embarking on the journey together.
Thanks so much. I've been talking to Andrew Forson, Head of Growth at the Hashgraph Association, about the new DeepTech Venture Studio in Saudi Arabia and its
You've been listening to a recording of Middle East AI News Live for Thursday, March 7th, 2024, brought to you by Carrington Malin. Thanks for listening.